Good morning, gamers, and welcome to episode 23 of Games with Dave. Joining me today, all the way from Italy, is the designer of the fully funded Kickstarter, These Stars Will Guide You Home, Furlan. I hope I'm saying your last name correctly. Perfect. These Stars Will Guide You Home is a solo journaling game in which players play two different characters, one before the other. And there's just 4 days left to back this amazing Kickstarter. So be sure to click the link in the description below and back it before it's too late. Thank you for joining me today, Albie. I'm thrilled to have you on.
Thanks for having me, Dave. Thanks for making the space for me. I know it was the time zone made it a little bit difficult, but you really pulled through there. So thanks for having me.
My pleasure. So how long have you been designing games, and what are a couple of the other projects that you've done?
So how long have I been designing games? Like for serious? Maybe 3 years, 3.5 years. And which coincides with the birth of my first son. Maybe there's something there to be examined. But before that, I always liked the idea of designing games. I remember like making a few mods for StarCraft, the video game, way back when it came out. Um, and running, Dungeons and Dragons is kind of game design because you make up your own dungeon. So I would say I've thought about designing games for the last 20 years. I've been designing games properly with a purpose for the last 3.5 years. And so These Stars Will Guide You Home is my third Kickstarter project. And my previous two were, the first one was Superstition, which was a solo journaling RPG about being an oracle for a community despite not believing in magic and in gods. And the second project was the Royal Cartographer, which was a solo and a multiplayer game which explored cartography and how it can be imprecise and only show a particular part of the story. And that was developed through the mechanics of players each having their own maps, but only some elements from each map being represented. And so that was my second project last year's, and now These Stars Will Guide You Home is inspired by the Odyssey. It's about a big journey through a sort of Greek archipelago, and then the story that gets written about it 100 years later.
Awesome. Well, all the games sound fun, and I'm especially excited to give These Stars Will Guide You Home a try. So how does a journaling game work? I've never played one, like we were saying before. And when I saw this project, I was immediately sold on the concept.
Oh, well, thank you for that. The So a journaling game it can be described as a creative writing exercise with prompts. It can be described as a world building exercise. It can be described as an introspective exercise, but basically the common feature is that the game will prompt you, the player, with a question or an event or something that comes out of a random table when you roll the dice, and it will ask you what happens now. And then the classic, creative writing exercise of you have a scene, and then you have to develop it by saying what happens next. So you write that down in your journal, hence the name. And then there might be very prescriptive mechanics, which say, if you wrote about this, then write that. And then it can almost become like a write your own, choose your own adventure book kind of thing. And then there are much looser systems, which are basically just a series of prompts, and you have to write a coherent narrative to make them all fit together in one big story. And so the onus of imagination can be a lot on the player, but you'll be surprised by how creative you can get with just a few words to prompt you into writing or to prompt your imagination. So that's how a solo journaling game works. Then there are other solo games like solo RPGs and solo board games. So the journaling part is really trying to get you to write and invent a story between prompts.
Awesome. That sounds incredibly fun. And I think it might actually help get the gears out of, like, the rust off the gears in my head for, like, my creative side.
Massively. Like, even just looking at the tables in some of these games, you don't even have to play these games to get sort of your creative juices flowing. You just have to look at what the prompts could bring up, and that's enough to inspire and to get you creating. I think they're a wonderful tool, absolutely wonderful tool. And then there are some games which go a little bit further and sort of ask you maybe to go out. I think there's one on Kickstarter right now called Project Terminus, which specifically asks you to go outside and observe the world as the prompt, but that you need then to write something about. So yeah, there's some fantastic games out there.
And there are a bunch of really good ones for ZineQuest right now.
Mm.
Um, so speaking of zines and ZineQuest, if I understand correctly, these stars will guide you home is split into two different zines, a 12-page zine and a 24-page zine. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's about right. So the 12-page zine is effectively the rules of both phases of the game. So the game is divided into two phases. In the first phase, you are the captain of a fleet of 13 ships, wandering through a mysterious archipelago, trying to find your new home. You're running away from something, can't go back, but you have to find something in this archipelago before your crew gets fed up and mutinies, basically. And then the second half of the game takes place 100 years later, and you are the descendant of one of the crew, basically writing down the story that up until then has only been kept orally. And there's a mechanic whereby some of the events of the journey are lost to history, some are warped, some are just completely deleted. They supposedly didn't happen. And so now you have to write the story with the fragments of the original, and you have to make it into a coherent narrative. So how do you do that when you only have, maybe 3 out of the 8 things that happened on that famous journey? Because some of them have been lost, some of them are contentious. In the meantime, sensibilities have changed. So those are the 2 rule sets in the 12-page zine, which is a little A5 booklet. And then the bigger one, the 24-page booklet, which will either be called an atlas or an almanac. I think I'm going to put a poll up on my Kickstarter page to see what the backers think. That's going to be basically an atlas of the islands that you could potentially find on your journey. And there's 2 reasons for this, to split them up. One is that when you have A5 and they're stapled, if you have too many pages, it starts to warp. So you want to keep the page count low. And the second is because in the first half of the game, you are the captain of a ship and you're a navigator. I wanted to simulate the idea of having the tools for navigation. So you'll have to check a star chart, check your coordinates, go back to the almanac and see what the island is that you found. And that's kind of by design. I wanted people to feel like they were working through something to figure out where they were in the sea and which island they were going to come across. And it was too easy to just say, roll the dice and that's the island you found. I wanted them to feel like, okay, if that's the star and that's how far I've moved, obviously it's not that complicated, it's not that involved. It's it only takes 30 seconds. But bouncing back and forth between these booklets means you kind of have that feeling of, I've discovered this island and I've figured out where we are. So that justifies the division between the 2 booklets, basically.
Gotcha. Yeah, and it makes sense because I can picture like the captain of a ship looking at his map and then having to consult his star chart and having everything kind of spread out. And yeah, that seems really, really, really
that's
cool.
the vibe I was going for. And obviously you can't go too far the other way. You don't want to make it busy work for players, because otherwise they just get into actual celestial navigation. But it's a fine line to walk, and I think I've just about hit it, judging from the feedback I've gotten about the game.
Awesome. I'm glad to hear that the play testing is going well.
Yeah.
Excuse me. So I also saw that you use both a coin and playing cards in this game. Can you explain how both of those work mechanically in the game?
Sure. So the cards are basically the prompts. So that's where the prompts come from. Every time you decide to set sail and explore a different hex on the map that you're given with the game, you draw a card, and that's something that happens to you and your crew out to sea. It's nothing like, you might not find an island at the end of this journey, but something definitely happens. And you use hearts and spades. It used to be that hearts was a good thing that's happened and spades is a bad thing that's happened to you, but now I think it's gone more of hearts is something more, let's say, realistic, and then spades is something more supernatural that happens to you on your trip. So you've got this division between natural and supernatural events that could happen on your trip, which kind of inform the story and make it a little bit more interesting. Because if it's all supernatural or if it's all natural, it's not quite as interesting as a mix of the two. And then the coin is a push your luck mechanic. So every time you decide to set sail, and every time you find an island, your crew is going to say, are we going to settle here? Is this our new home? And you can choose whether to move on or to settle there. And if you decide to settle there, the game asks you to write about what that looks like and why you chose that place. If you don't, you flip a coin. And depending on the result, your crew either gets a little bit more tired or very much more tired. So it's basically between 1 and 2, it's binary. And if they get, and you add that to their exhaustion meter, and if you go too high in the exhaustion meter, the crew basically say, okay, that's enough, we're done, this is it. Or they could say, okay, you're no longer the captain, you're getting off here and we're going back to the island we found previously. So it's basically it's a push your luck mechanic, and the meter's always moving forward, but it's moving forward. Sometimes it goes up by 1, sometimes it goes up by 2. And so there will come a point where you're like, okay, I if I roll if I throw heads both times on this coin, I could potentially explore an extra 2 islands and then get away with choosing the one I want to settle. But if I throw heads once, I'm done for. So what am I going to roll? What am I going to do now? And I thought that was a very simplistic but good enough way to sort of reduce the potential for mutiny in the crew, because it's like, how far can I push these people? They really want to settle. And the coin was just a good way of sort of reducing that to a manageable size. And also, I like making games that you can play with everything that you have at home. You know, I'm not going to ask you to have to download an app or to have something really complicated to play with. It's cards. Sometimes I use dice in my games, and coins, even tarot cards. I sometimes have reservations about because I don't know if everybody has a tarot deck at home. And you can do all of that online, but I prefer the physical experience. So I try to keep the components as simple and as easy to find as possible.
Very cool. And then I love the sound of the mechanics, and I will probably say it 100 more times. I cannot wait to play this game.
Can't wait to get it to you and have it physically in my hands as well.
So you've mentioned the islands a couple times. How many islands are there currently for players to discover?
So in the prototype, there are currently 9, 6 of which have been illustrated, but the final game will have 25.
Wow. That's a lot of islands.
Yeah, but there's a number of reasons for that. One is because the illustrator, Fernando, is amazing, and I wanted him to draw as many islands as possible, and the 6 he's done so far are absolutely stunning. So 25 was a good number because I just want to see more of them. And the other reason is mechanically, some of the islands won't appear in your playthrough. So the archipelago is randomly generated at the beginning of your game. And you might not see, in fact, mathematically, there is no way you're going to see all of the islands, but also some of the islands are not going to be present in the archipelago. Like, even if you sort of brute force the game, didn't bother with throwing the coin, and just explored over the archipelago, you're not going to see all of the islands because of the way coordinates work. So 25 means you've got some replay value. It means that the next time you play through, once you generate your archipelago, you might have a different set of islands showing up on your trip, and that's a different story.
Yeah, it sounds like the replayability on this is almost infinite with that many islands and the way everything gets set up.
Yeah, there's a mechanic at the beginning of it where basically you fill out your night sky. You name the stars in your night sky, and depending on where you put those stars, the islands shift around in the archipelago. So potentially everybody could have their own personal playthrough that nobody else will have. And depending on where the islands are in the star chart, they move around. The game will come with 4 different star charts, so you can choose which one to play, which implies a different story. And then obviously there's the player factor, because if you choose to go one place and you write a certain story about it, and then you choose to go to another island, then the story you've written about it will change depending on what you've discovered before. So yes, I was really aiming for replayability, and I think I might have overshot it. Like, there's too much to explore, but that's good because it means that potentially everybody could have their own personal playthrough of this. No two should look alike, basically.
No, and I think it's really cool that the replay value is so high on this, because there are some games out there that you play once or twice and you're like, they can't really do much more. But this sounds like I was saying that the possibilities are limitless with how many times you could play this.
Yeah, with solo journaling games, because you are playing by yourself, sometimes it's difficult to get out of your own head. And even if the prompts are different, you might be telling the same story, just from a different point of view. But with this one, hopefully you'll be able to sort of tell a different story every time, even if you're playing the same captain or the same fleet, because the world you're exploring is different.
Right.
Fingers crossed, anyway. That's a very lofty goal. Let's see if it works.
I think you're going to nail it, man. So,
Thanks.
um, speaking of the islands and the archipelago and everything, can you explain how the hex map works? I noticed there were some arrows pointing one way and others pointing another.
So that's the coordinate system. So you've got this blank circular hex map, which should have, I think it's 37 hexes. The version I've got now is 37 hexes. And the arrows on the left are where you have to put in your star names. The arrows at the bottom are also where you have to put in your star names. You have 2 sets of stars. So you'll write them down in any order you choose on the left, and you write them across in any order you choose on the bottom. And then once you start exploring the archipelago, you'll say, okay, I want to sail to this hex. This hex is underneath the stars of, let's say, Regulus and Vega. So you go check your star chart and you look, okay, Regulus and Vega means I found Lamos, the mysterious lighthouse. And then, okay, so you've arrived, you found an island, you write about what happened on the trip, you write about what you do on the island, and then the famous choice comes in. Do I settle in this place, or do I go and check another hex? So you check, if you decide to check another hex, you'll go, see, let's follow Vega, but go to Bellatrix instead. Okay, so what lies at the crossing of Vega and Bellatrix? You find another island, and that's how it goes on. So the hex map is effectively a way of finding the islands that are in this archipelago, and it's inspired by by my discovery. I didn't know this was a thing, but apparently it's not just the North Star that you can use, or the Southern Cross that you can use to navigate at sea. There are, it's another 57 stars, where if you have some other data, like your time and other things, I can't, I'm not a navigator, but basically, if you can identify those stars in the sky, they can give you a fixed position, even though they're not the North Star, because even though they're not fixed at north, they still have predictable movement. So if you know like what day it is and you can spot where Vega is, then you know more or less where you are. And that's a thing, that's a real thing, that I discovered, and that sort of inspired These Stars Will Guide You Home.
That's really cool. I never knew that myself. I always thought it was just the North Star and the Southern Cross, like you were saying. Um, let me see here. Sorry, brain fart here. Oh, you had one stretch goal that you blew right by with the funding. What can you tell me about that stretch goal?
So, for a while now, I've wanted to have guest writers on my games, because in the same way I was saying beforehand, if you're playing a solo journaling game, it's very difficult to get out of your own head. Then when you're writing a game, it's exactly the same issue. And I wanted some guest writers to come in and create a few islands that were different than what I would have come up with. So I contacted 4 guest writers, and obviously their work needs to be paid. So I set that as a stretch goal. We blew past it. So I'm very happy to say there are going to be 4 of the 25 islands with their relative prompts are going to be written by the guest writers, which are Sam Lee of Anamnesis fame, Marks of High Water, which you might have played Ghostbox by, and Jimmy Shelter, who's also got a Kickstarter campaign going on right now, and Ryan from Bleak Horizon Press, who doesn't have a Kickstarter campaign going on right now, but his zine Almost Bow from 2021, ZineQuest 3, was a fantastic piece of work with really good writing in it. And so for different reasons, I decided to contact all of them, and they were all very, very happy. And I'm very, very happy that they said, yes, we'll definitely write an island for you.
That's so cool. I'm glad that you were able to achieve that.
Yeah, and they all bring something different. Like they're all very different writers. You go from Ryan's. In fact, I'm gonna cough a second, and I'm gonna talk about each of them really quickly. So, Sam wrote Anamnesis, and they achieve so much with so few words. The prompts in Anamnesis are absolutely fantastic, and they are very on point with very few words. Then Marks, their game, Ghostbox, is about unanswered correspondence, which is such a good idea. And it's a very easy system to hack and write your own prompts for. And just the idea of, writing letters that never get answered is a very romantic notion, which is what should be coming in to the islands there. And a sensibility for human connection. Marx does really well with human connections. Jimmy is really good at urban environments. So we haven't spoken about what they're gonna write, but I hope it's a city because this is really, really good. And Ryan does weird and sort of Cthulhu esque stuff very, very well. So they all bring something different to the game, and I cannot wait to see what they come up with.
Yeah, I'm with you. That sounds like a lot of variation for those 4 islands.
Absolutely.
So I'd like to go back to the cards for a second.
Mhm.
Because I saw in yesterday's update, you're actually working on a mini game that's going to incorporate the diamonds and the clubs.
Yeah, that was kind of a direct request from the artist Fernando. Basically, the game, as it stands, only uses, as I said before, hearts and spades. And he has drawn, Fernando's drawn some really elaborate art for those 2 suits to be included within the zine. But there was no reason to draw the other 2 diamonds and clubs, and he was basically begging for any excuse to illustrate those 2 as well. And he loves his work. Like when we talk about the islands that we're going to illustrate, you can see his eyes light up, and he has these amazing ideas about illustration. So he really, really wanted an excuse to draw those extra 2 suits. So I thought, well, yeah, why wouldn't I, have my illustrator do that? So I've basically spoken to my printer, and there's going to be a little postcard mini game added to the zine. So now everybody who backs the physical edition will have the 2 physical zines and an A5 postcard with a mini game on it. And obviously, if you've only backed the digital edition, you'll get the equivalent digital version. What am I going to do with that game? I have 3 ideas. I need to play test them because I only came up with this like 36 hours ago. But the possibilities are something to do with archaeology. So I like the idea of you're playing you're the captain of the ship. 100 years pass. You're writing the epic, sort of like the Odyssey or the Iliad, describing the thing. And then the mini game is maybe 2,000 years later when you're digging up the archaeological remains of that settlement and you're trying to figure out what happened, basically. So that's one potential thing, sort of stretching the game through time. The other idea I've had is something to do with drawing constellations. So having maybe one side of the postcard be a starry sky, and the two suits basically prompt you to write the names of the stars, to give them names, and to draw constellations between them, and to give the constellations meaning. Because, stars have effectively always been used as a way to say that's what the gods are saying. That's the gods trying to communicate to us. And if only we can read the fabric of the stars, then we can figure out a better way to live life, or how the gods want us to live life. So maybe a mini game that has you sort of creating the origin story of your people. And the third option is basically the idea that there's two suits, and you are, this game is inspired by the Odyssey, so you might be sailing through Scylla and Charybdis. It's just, it's too good an opportunity to pass.
It
Like,
is.
you're in dire straits, you've got a monster on one hand and rocks on the other. How are you going to sail through them? You've got two suits, one on the one hand, one on the other. I don't know how that mechanically that's going to work, but it seems too good an opportunity to not explore. Basically, I'm going to have to see if I can do something with that, and then I'm going to have to test all of them and see which one's the best. But that's happening. Everybody is getting an extra mini game just so Fernando can illustrate those two suits, and we can all see what he comes up with.
I can't wait. Those all sound like amazing options, and it's going to be a hard choice, it sounds like, to decide on which one you actually want to do.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm leaning towards the constellations. What about you? What if you had to choose one of the three? Which one would you choose?
Honestly, me, I would probably say the archaeology, because I think that opens up like a whole new dynamic and a potential for more storytelling of, how you're saying that 100 years later, you're telling one story. Well, 2,000 years later, you could reinterpret the whole story again.
Absolutely, depending on what's left in the ground.
Right.
That stems from an interesting question that I once read. It was tongue in cheek, but basically, if written and recorded history were to disappear overnight from our time, right? Or if somehow everything just got deleted, so all we were left with was materials and objects and things, but nothing writing, no testimony, nothing that describes our modern day culture. What would archaeologists think of Santa Claus? Right?
That's great. I love that. Like, would they think he was like some god being, where he's going to be found in so many homes, or
Exactly. And it's only in parts of the world, but in those parts of the world, everybody on the 24th of December leaves out a sacrifice, which is basically oatmeal and wine. And then if he is pleased, then he brings gifts, right?
yeah, and if he is displeased, you get nothing.
Exactly. So I'm interested in that kind of. It's a funny story, but it does sort of point to the fact that we can only make assumptions when we're looking at ancient history. And sort of, I like flipping that on its head and saying, ancient history, what's it going to look like to people that come 2,000 years after you? I'll see.
That's a tough choice, my friend.
Mm.
So with just 4 days left for folks to back the project, what would you say to anyone that's still undecided about backing it?
So I'd love to know why they're undecided, because I'm always trying to find ways to improve the games. And in fact, this game came from a poll that I gave to backers of my previous game to see which one of my crazy ideas they preferred. Jump on board to These Stars Will Guide You Home, because it's got a lot of replayability, but also I plan to build a community around this a little bit. I plan to maybe create more islands and more star charts down the line. So you'll be able to revisit this. It's not a one and done. And I plan to have the community contribute to this as well. Maybe have a jam for islands. And I just I think it's a good, if you like creative writing, then I think this is a good starting point to get into solo journaling. Um, so that's why you should jump on board now. Basically, I hope that's convinced people that we're on the fence.
I hope so, because I think this is going to be a fantastic game that people are going to love. So, well, that was
Thank you.
actually, oh, you're welcome. That was actually all I had for today, Albie. Do you feel like there's anything that we might have missed that you would like to bring to folks' attention, or?
Um, I guess if people aren't already aware of ZineQuest, I think that now's a good time to jump in on the indie RPG, not just solo journaling, but there are loads of indie RPGs out there right now being made and being crowdfunded. There's something there for everybody. There's something there for people who want RPGs to sort of have a little bit of me time and sort of chill out and be reflective about things. There are RPGs that explore interesting topics. For example, Marx's A Loud Noise in a Quiet Place is one I'd suggest you check out. And there are RPGs which are about being just going on really fun adventures with boisterous people and, you know, having as much of a laugh as possible. There's something there for everyone. And ZineQuest is a great way to jump in because there's so much on show. Everybody's bouncing off each other and trying to point to cool projects that they see. And with ZineQuest, you are probably supporting somebody who doesn't do this for a living, but does this as a passion project. And there is no more valid way, I think, of spending your hard-earned cash than supporting somebody else's art and somebody else's passion, which then comes back to you by giving you fun times and play times. So I think ZineQuest is definitely an event to start looking at that scene if you've thought about it but haven't really been pushed into it so far.
I could not have said that better myself.
Thank
That
you.
was very well put. Well, thank you so much for joining me today, Albie. I had a blast talking about These Stars Will Guide You Home. And folks out there, I hope you found this video informative. And if you haven't already, click the link down below and back. These Stars Will Guide You Home. And if you did find the video informative, give it a thumbs up and maybe think of subscribing to the channel. Other than that, have a great